Hi everyone, welcome to edneurorad.com. I'm going to be giving a quick overview of the contents of the website as well as how to use the web viewer as it relates to the cases as well as the anatomy modules. So basically the website has two separate parts, a case list that are going to be a series of cases with an ED and on-call flavor that you can use to prepare for call, as well as at the moment two anatomy modules. Cases, I've sort of for now just separated them to all or vascular cases. All cases would just include all the cases on this website. You can see a good collection of cases here, all as unknowns. And then the vascular cases, these are based on a vascular case conference I gave to residents a while back, which I think are good cases. The vascular cases, I strongly encourage you, as well as with the all cases, to go in order. So from V1 to V18, and for regular cases from case 1 up. And the vascular cases in particular all have multiple parts. So when you go to case V1, for instance, and you click a case, you'll see the case, you see the indication for the study, and then you have the web viewer. So the web viewer is basically supposed to simulate what a real PACS would look like. You start with two panels. You can scroll with the scroll button. You scroll through the images. There's a series of tools for you to interact with each panel. Window is windowing. You can window this as much as you want. You can see what the window width and the window center are. There's some preset windows, lung windows if you need to, soft tissue windows, brain windows, and then bone windows. And there's keyboard shortcuts for those, 1, 2, 3, and 4 are the different windows you can use. All the tools also have keyboard shortcuts. When you hover over them, you can see that there's a keyboard shortcut. So for pan, it would be P. So when you hit P, you'll go to the pan and you can move this thing around. For scroll, it's S. So you hit S and you can just move your mouse around and you can scroll with your left mouse button. For the moment, the right mouse button and the left mouse button, they do the exact same thing. So there's no difference between the two. The cursor tool is unique in that, it basically, when you click on something, it tells you what the Hounsfield unit value is right under the cursor, and then it sets all the other panels to be at the exact same location as that cursor. So, when you click here, it shows where that other panel is in that exact same spot, tells you what the Hounsfield unit value is. The MPRs is more relevant to thin section images, but it goes through the three basic MPR orientations: axial, sagittal, and coronal, as you can see here when you click it. This rotate axis tool I'll describe later on in the video, and you can go to the specific chapter for it if you want. And then the reset just resets all the settings to when it was at the very beginning for that panel. There are other tools that are for the whole viewer as a whole. You have the toggle full screen. It basically toggles the viewer to the entirety of your screen. Then this, you can hit that again, it will come back. There's a change layout button. You can change your layout to however many as you want, up to 3 by 3. So if you put it at 2 by 6, you can have 2 panels, 2 rows, and 3 columns, etc. And then the linked scroll, if you hit it, enable it, you can see that your all your panels, if they share an orientation, they will link and scroll together. So this could be pretty helpful for your MRIs. If you have a whole bunch of series, you can just link them and scroll all of them together. Once you're done looking at the case and come up with your own impression of what it's going to be, you can either click the Readout button or the discussion. When you click the Readout, as I will in a moment, you'll just see me and a red cursor explaining the salient features of the case. So we'll hit that here. This particular head CT is normal with no intracranial hemorrhage and no gray-white junction differentiation lost. So this one I picked specifically because it was a normal case. The main part for this case is to look at the follow-up portions of the case. And you can see here that the red arrow is where I'm at any point in the readout. You can use this slider to go to different parts of the readout. As you can see, it will just automatically scroll the panels to where I am at any particular time. And when you pause the readout, you can just feel free to scroll through the volumes as you would. And then when you hit the play again, CT is normal with no... it just goes back to playing as it was. And then there's also usually a short discussion. So you hit the discussion button, it just shows the discussion. Non-contracted CT looks essentially normal. CT perfusion and CTA are next. Now, a lot of the discussions are going to have actual panels in the discussion like this. At the beginning, they're locked. So if you want to actually interact with them, panels, you can hit the lock-unlock button. And then now you can actually scroll through them. You can use all these tools, etc., to do what you want. And then when you mess around with the panel that's in a discussion section, when you hit the reset, it goes back to where that panel was, when you first hit the discussion. And then you can go back to viewer. Now, some of the cases, as I said, will have follow-up portion. So here is the follow-up case, case V1 part 2 that you can go, or you can use the case navigation at the bottom here, case V1 part 2, and so you would go to the next part. In this particular case, this was the first part of a vascular series. It was normal, so you go to the next part, which will be, in this particular case, a CTA and CT perfusion, and you'll do the exact same thing. Again, MPRs will be very helpful for CTAs. So as you can see, here's a CTA. You can window it to the appropriate window for to look at your vessels, do MPRs, use your cursor, etc. You can always put 2 of the same series on different panels, and then you would have multiple different projections of the same data, and this will be helpful with, again, these thin sections CTA. You can see the same anatomy on axial and as well as on the sagittal. And then obviously you have the localizer line showing you where this articular axial is, and you can MPR this one to, for instance, coronal, etc. So the next major content of the website are these anatomy modules. Right now there's 2. Let's hit the skull base and brain anatomy module. So you can see these images are starting to load right now. It takes a little while for it because these are much bigger images. So for the main anatomy module is a brain and skull base anatomy module. So you'll have basically matched CT bone as well as a T1 post-contrast images. When you first load them up, you see all these different colored annotations describing what different structures are. This user interface is inspired by what head, neck, brain, spine used to look like. And when you hover your mouse over a particular structure, here in the bottom, it will tell you what that structure is. So for instance, mastoid temporal bone here. This will be the petrous portion of the temporal bone, etc. You can use, they're presented on the exact same viewer as the viewer you use for your cases. So, you can use all the same tools, the same cursors, etc. You can use the same layout features. When you make this a 2x3 layout, it is actually smart. It automatically makes them axials, sagittals, and coronals, and then the CTs on top and the MRIs on the bottom. There's this one additional feature that's toggle anatomical label. When you click this button, all the labels go away. You can still hover your mouse over a part of the brain or skull, and it will tell you what it is on the bottom. So for instance, here you're toggling your mouse over the occipital bone, and it'll tell you what it is, but the images, the color overlay doesn't show. If you wanted to look for a particular structure, you can always click your mouse over here and say which structures you want to show. Now this all would show obviously all the structures automatically. This none, if you now rotate and go to none, this will show none of the structures to begin with, but it would actually, when you hover your mouse over a structure, it'll paint it over for you. So it's different from toggling all the anatomy labels off, which wouldn't show anything. This one, it would actually show that particular structure when your mouse is hovered over it. But if you wanted to, let's say, look at the pterygopalatine fossa, you would say pterygopalatine fossa left. And when you click that, it will go to the pterygopalatine fossa on the left on all your images, and you can scroll through. And that is the only anatomy that it would display. Obviously, if you then move your mouse around, you can see the adjacent structures, like this is a pterygomaxillary fissure. You can zoom in and out of the various structures. Here you go. There's a pterygomaxillary fissure connecting the pterygopalatine fossa to the masticator space right here. Alright, so the final tool of the viewer module is this rotate axis. This is basically allows you to make arbitrary 3-dimensional MPRs. This really makes sense for just the thin section images, like the thin section CTs and CTAs. So let's say you wanted to look at this. I'm using the cursor tool. I have this CTA on the 3 typical orientations. Let's say you wanted to interrogate this carotid bulb vertebra. You can put your cursor over the carotid bulb. Then when you go to this rotate axis tool, let's go on the sagittal here. You can go to the rotate axis tool. You first click it, it will be a second while this data gets transferred to the GPU for processing, but now at this point you can rotate this particular panel in any direction you want. And it will rotate around this cursor point. So when I move my cursor up and down, when I start dragging and dropping up and down, it's going to rotate it around the horizontal axis. So you can see it's rotating through the horizontal axis. I'm in sagittal, so if I rotate around the horizontal axis, I'll eventually end up in something that resembles axial plane, and it sort of does resemble the axial plane. Now, if I go back to the sagittal plane with the NPRs and I rotate and I drag my mouse left to right, it'll rotate around the horizontal plane. So I'll go from the sagittal to a coronal plane. And there you go. You can see I've essentially now arrived at the coronal plane. Now, because you're completely free to rotate in whichever direction you want, you can actually start making these non-anatomic images where left-right is flip or top-down is flip. You can see here I rotated all the way around, so now the top is on the bottom and the bottom's on the top, etc. But there's nothing really to prevent that, honestly, just because you gotta just be careful to not do that. Or whenever you're sort of in an orientation that looks non-anatomic, you can always just hit your NPR buttons and it'll go through the standard NPR orientations. One thing is, this thing, it's done one time per each series. So the next time you try to rotate this thing in 3D in any of the panels, it'll be fast. And you need to actually, when this 3D indicator is here, that means this panel has been upgraded to a 3D panel, so you can do these axis rotation stuff in it. However, any panel that isn't have that 3D, you can't actually do the rotation. So you can see in this panel, you can't do rotations yet because this button, even though this button is on, you can't do the rotations yet because it's not been upgraded to a 3D. To upgrade it to a 3D, you actually have to click this button, and then you know it's transitioned to a 3D because the 3D indicator is now on, and now you can also do the arbitrary rotations in this particular plane. This is nice because not only can you do arbitrary rotation NPRs, you can also even do MIPs. So when you double check this MIP button, you now have maximum intensity projections. You can, when you first click the MIP, this slider comes up, you can adjust the thickness of your MIP, and then again you can even rotate it in whatever direction you want, which is pretty nice. So you can also do this three-dimensional NPR or rotation of your axis on the annotated anatomy modules. So you can, have an anatomy module, and let's say you wanted to go and make now a orientation that's sort of parallel to the plane of the superior semicircular canal, which you commonly get with these temporal bone CTs. Right now, obviously, in our temporal bone CT anatomy module, there's just one thin section. You can do NPRs on it, but using the typical NPR just goes to the three orthogonal, typical axial, sagittal, coronal orientation. Now, you wanted to make your own sort of oblique coronal or oblique sagittal through the superior semicircular canal. So I've already upgraded this panel to 3D using your rotate axis tool. You just kind of rotate it. You can look at what the localizer is like on the other panels and bring it until you have a plane that's basically parallel to the orientation of the superior semicircular canal. So now you have this superior semicircular canal nicely profiled, and every other anatomy has also been rotated, and you can see it's basically as if same as always. You go over anatomy, it'll tell you what that thing is. Here's a superior semicircular canal, this is the crus communis of the superior semicircular and posterior semicircular canal, etc.